all here for week one of Poverty by America. And a quote that we pulled that we kind of liked to highlight is: In the land of the free, there's plenty of poverty above the poverty line, and plenty far, far below it. And so, to get us kicked off, Jamel's going to do a, quick, I shouldn't say high level summary. It's more a quick level summary of what this week's reading, the prologue through chapter two, included, in case you haven't had a chance to read, or if it's been a minute since you've read and you need a quick refresher. So go ahead, Jamel.
Yeah, and I'll just start by saying we know that not everybody gets a chance to read everything every week, and we design the questions and the discussion so that people can participate or benefit either way. So never be shy about joining if you haven't done the reading. Of course, the books are great, and we encourage people to read them, and we'll talk about some of the things that if you haven't read it, that you may want to look to. But the materials that Robin puts together are really fantastic. It's not just a discussion of the books and questions, but it's also some links to other things that relate to the discussions in the book. So really, these are just, I've been so impressed by the materials that she puts together for this. It's a wealth of information, and I get more out of the books because of what she puts into it. But let me just jump in by saying today we're covering the prologue in chapters 1 and 2 of Poverty by America. Matthew Desmond actually starts out in the prologue by discussing why he was interested in the topic. And he talks a little bit about his own life growing up in a family with very modest income. And when he went to college, he noticed that a lot of his fellow students clearly were living in a different world than him. And that interested him in terms of why it was that people were in different settings or different points. And so he's spent some time focusing on this. In the prologue, he says, going through a number of things, but he says, "This is who we are, the richest country on earth with more poverty than any other advanced democracy. If America's poor founded a country, that country would have a bigger population than Australia or Venezuela. Almost 1 in 9 Americans, including 1 in 8 children, live in poverty. There are more than 38 million people living in the United States who cannot afford basic necessities, and more than 108 million getting by on $55,000 a year or less, many stuck in that space between poverty and security." So he talks a little bit about himself and he talks about the topic. And then in chapter 1, he goes through a couple of scenarios of describing what poverty is like in the United States. And in chapter 2, he asks why we haven't made more progress against in the fight against poverty. He describes in all of this, he describes the personal and economic hardships that are commonplace in the lives of poor people, and the fact that even when the standard of living rises generally, it doesn't necessarily rise for people who are at that poverty level. Because as standards of living rise, certain things that we had thought were luxuries in the past essentially become necessities. Look at the internet that we're using right now. Look at how much of a necessity that became during COVID. And look at how, in our schools, the fact that not everybody had the same types of access to the equipment that we're using right now created more disparity from folks. He also talks a little bit about what people perceive as causes of poverty, and he describes how people sometimes focused it on your race, sometimes they're focusing it on family. And he's saying to a certain extent, some of those things that we use to explain poverty may not actually be what's going on. And in the end of chapter 2, he essentially brings out the question and he says, to a certain extent, we have poverty because we choose to have poverty in this country. And even though we may talk about trying to solve it, we really haven't chosen to solve the issue. And so that's the basic of what's going on here. I'll let Wes or anybody else jump in with any points that I might have missed. But just to give you a flavor for how he's approaching it, and some of the things that we'll be talking about today. Oh, I will say, one other thing, and I found this very compelling, was that he didn't just associate poverty with being a lack of of money or financial means. In the notes that you'll see today, Robin spelled out that poverty is pain, violence, trauma, instability, constant fear, loss of liberty, shame-inducing, and diminished life and personhood. So he's talked about the fact that this is not just about um, money and paying for things. It's about the way that we feel about ourselves and the way we feel about others as well, and how they feel when they are in a situation of poverty.
Thank you so much, Jamel. And I believe Robin will be putting in the chat that reader's discussion guide that she creates. Please note not only this summary and all the questions that we have, but if you scroll to the bottom, there is a plethora of resources that are truly valuable and can help you as you go about, I think Desmond says that we need to be poverty abolitionists. I believe is a call in this week's reading. And so those resources will really help deepen your understanding and help encourage you as you move forward in the work to abolishing poverty in America. So let's get started. Question number 1. America's
Did we
poverty.
have, Wes, were we going to do a poll question, or is that a little bit later, or we're not going to do
Well,
one?
we were, and I forgot to set it up. So maybe we'll set it up after I start this question, because my bad. Thank you for the reminder. We always usually start with the poll question, so we'll do that after this one. And again, remember to raise your Zoom hand, or you can also share your thoughts in the chat. But question 1, America's poverty is not for lack of resources. We lack something else. What are we lacking? I'm going to keep this on the screen for, probably about 20, 30 more seconds. I'm a teacher, so silence is a-okay with me. And then I'll take it down so I can see all your faces and see what you're putting in the chat. And it looks like we got some good thoughts going in the chat. We lack the will, we lack the empathy. Lack of understanding about the systemic nature of poverty. Ooh, there's some depth there. An attitude of fairness. Seeing if I missed anything else. And remember, you can raise your Zoom hand if you would like, and we'll get your mic turned on so that you can share. Ooh, enough anger. Insight. Lack of desire to change by those who are not suffering. Ooh. American culture is centered on the individual as opposed to the community. It's selfish. Education. Again, what is poverty? And what does it do to all of us? I have to tell you this, we have not had this many chat comments ever. So it's really cool to see, and I appreciate those who are going to the chat to react to what folks say. Political will and greed. Anyone who did comment in the chat, want to raise their Zoom hand and we'll allow you to kind of maybe expand on what you said? Because you all have to give me more time to set up the poll question. So I need someone to talk.
While Wes is doing that, in addition to that question, just for those who have read even including, some general perceptions about the book as well, as we get started in our first week of discussion. Don't feel, we use the questions, to get conversations started, and they often lead to places that go beyond the questions. So don't be shy about that. And while Wes is setting things up, Annette, why don't you raise your hand? I'll ask you to unmute.
Good evening, everybody. It's good to see Wes and Jamal again, and Robin. It's good to see you all. I really liked everybody's hi Nelson. I really I think everybody's answer is well taken. I think for me, the issue of poverty is that it's so overwhelming. And that it because of the systemic nature of poverty, it feels so unsolvable. I am one of those who I actually finished reading the book. Not that I remember, not that I didn't have to go back and get ready for tonight, but he's going to go. He's going to go into a lot more explanation. But the thing that the person just said about the community is he's going to talk a lot about the richer get, the less is put into community. And that's something that I think a lot about. But yeah, for me, this is just very overwhelming. And I, as a person, I think, what can I do to solve it? But the book is great, by the way. I have really enjoyed it. It's probably not quite the word, because it's a hard read in terms of its content, but he makes things very, very clear.
And Stacy, I see you have your hand up. Let me ask you, while I'm unmuting you, I'm also going to mention that this book we picked after the last book that we chose. They talk of Joseph Stiglitz, Power Politics, something in Profits, basically goes through some of the similar discussion, but in this I feel like there's a lot more passion in this book. It's less academic. But Stacy, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that it is a complex issue, as most large problems or societal problems are. And there are a lot of Americans who are very simplistic, and complexity does not come easily to them, or understanding it, or even looking for it, allowing for it. And then also, kind of along with that, a lot of Americans are not empathetic, and they feel like they weren't lucky, that they just worked hard. And if you work hard, you won't be in poverty. Again, tying back into complexity, that, hard work is not the only thing. And I do believe, I'm lucky enough not to experience it, but I do believe that the people in poverty work harder than anyone else just to get somewhere, just to get to work and get their kids out the door.
Those are good points and I think that he points out in his discussion that people who are working, I mean, the working poor are in that poverty camp. And very good point, Stacy.
Well, I have bad news. The poll is not working on Zoom, so I can't figure out how to get it to work. So we won't have a poll tonight, but hopefully we can figure out why it's not working. Looks like Amy. You're oh, there he is. Amy, started to hear you and then it went off. I'm going to send a prompt to unmute.
Okay, better?
Yes.
It, um, I think part of the problem is that we always, we tend to think of, in terms of a viewpoint of scarcity, that, by supporting one group, we tend to think that we are, um, losing resources, you know, for another group. It's like you've got to get beyond the zero sum game notion. And there's a lot of misperceptions about people in poverty. The one of the main misperceptions is that, you know, you'll often hear, well, they don't value education, they don't value a work ethic, you know, and that's such BS. I mean, if you look at the statistics, um, I read from Jonathan Kozol, he looked at tax rates of people, inner city, they would give up more of the proportion of their income for school taxes than middle class Americans because of their value of education. And I think there's just a lot of misperception about, you know, we're so rooted to that middle class, Horatio Alger, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, not even realizing so much of what middle class Americans enjoy has not necessarily been earned. There's just so many hidden obstacles, um, when you start really looking at poverty and disenfranchised people.
Appreciate it, Amy. And I don't see any other hands. And so I will note, Nelson, for example, just put a link in there. Robin takes notes. We save these meeting chats, and then we try to create a follow-up guide that includes all these references that folks make so that you all have it to digest afterwards, because I know it's a lot, as many of you have said. So we're going to move on to question 2, and I will hand it over to Jamel to facilitate that discussion.
Sure. So, there is plenty of poverty above the poverty line. What does this look like for people who live at or close to the poverty line? This is, I mean, we put this question in there to have a discussion in terms of what we as a group see or what we think, with respect to what the author is pointing out in terms of plenty of poverty above the poverty line. So, in your view, what does this look like for people who live at or close to the poverty line? And then, Wes, if you can go back to the main screen, we can see who's got their hands up. I see in the chat we've got people talking about health outcomes. I don't know if you want to pull on that a little bit more, or you're just feel free to raise your hand and expand on that. Kara says, sorry, don't really understand the question. I think what we were trying to do here is use this as a discussion point to talk about the fact that we think of that measurement of poverty and people who are below the poverty line and look at that as a big part of the problem, but not necessarily focusing enough on people who are above the poverty line, but essentially still struggling, and just getting by. I think in chapter 1, he talks about a couple of folks. Crystal is one example of somebody who just could not get out of the poverty trap, and I believe it was in the prologue. He's talking about people who were working many jobs or more than one job for the purpose of just trying to stay afloat. Robin, you've got your hand up, so yeah, just go ahead.
Yeah. Well, you gave one great example with what you said about people working multiple jobs to try to stay above the poverty line. And I think that ties into what a lot of people are saying in the chat, the health incomes and living paycheck to paycheck, things like that, and how um, having to live your life in that manner impacts your day-to-day lived experience, and the fact that you don't qualify for aid, but you also don't make enough money to live sustainably, and what that translates to in your everyday life. Like you said, Jamel, is really the root behind this question.
And I really thank you for those who were willing to share, and it came across as something personal. And, part of this discussion is when we share our personal stories, there's power in that story and power to realize how does this connect to policy and getting the attention of our policymakers, because the reality is many of us are just that one crisis away. And if we can explain that, and then they see that so many faces from different walks of life truly know what this feels like, and that fear and anxiety, as someone said, telling that story allows others to wake up and be like, oh yeah, you know what, that's me too. And when more people say, oh, wow, yeah, I'm in the same boat, there's power in that collective story in order to bring about change. So thank you for those who are sharing.
I think Tracy's got a good response here where she says undervalued work, even for some community serving professions. I agree with that 100%. That's how I feel like a lot of people who are right at that poverty line work in those professions that are vital to our community, but their pay doesn't translate to the value that they add to our society.
So we have Lucy with her hand up, and then Ramiz. I'll ask Lucy to unmute first.
Thank you. I look at the poverty guideline for 2024 for a family of two. It's $20,440 a year, which is less than $2,000 a month. I live in Oakland, California. You can't get a place to rent for that amount. So I think for the majority of people who are above this guideline, but below a living wage, it's just struggle, one way or another. And as he describes in the chapter, just problem mounting on top of problem, dragging people down with little hope for getting out of that. So that's what I'm picturing. The guidelines ridiculous.
That struggle after struggle, and people have talked. I mean, he mentions fear, and that's coming up in the comments a lot too. Struggle and fear, and thank you, Lucy. Ramiz, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
So my question is like, we live in a great nation. I'm not in USA presently. Okay. But like I'm not able to understand that what are the basic reasons for many people having some financial problems in our great nation nowadays. And how can we solve that? What are the basic reasons? How can we find out the reasons for it?
You know, one of and he's trying to narrow down some of the in the beginning part of the book. He's raising some discussion points and trying to narrow things down. And you know, I think Lucy, you said for a family of two. You know, now that's not necessarily including children, but you know, once you have children, you know, obviously that fear intensifies, you know, because you're supporting more folks. And I get, he points out the fact that at some point they said that the recipe to stay out of poverty was get a job, have education, and I think it was put off having children, you know, for a while, something like that. And I think that he said that even if you took those variables away, you still saw classes of people, minorities, Blacks and Hispanics, that even if you took those variables away, they were still not getting out of poverty, you know, as if that was the only answer. So he's basically saying there's something else is going on here as well. And as we get into other parts of the book, I think he talks about that a little bit more. But you're all raising good points, you know, which I think help us understand a little bit more. Kamna, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see many of you again. So I had one thought, and I feel like it's a little bit disjointed, but it's connected to what we're talking about. So I saw there's a lot of people in the Bay Area, and I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area as well, and I'm in a suburb called San Ramon, which is, I think, your typical upper middle class, affluent suburb outside of a major like metropolitan area. And you know, I think it's really easy for those of us not in this situation to look around and be like, there's so many jobs available. There's help wanted signs everywhere. People are hiring, you know, why are these jobs not getting filled? And, you know, all these people who are struggling, they just need to get a job here. And I think like one of the things that I think about a lot is that for someone to work in, you know, in my city at a restaurant or a retail shop or, you know, whatever, or even as, you know, like we face this with, you know, home contractors or plumbers, you know, things like that, is that they can't afford to live here and to commute. And the Bay Area, I know, is twisted and lopsided in this way even more, but it's like people are living an hour, 90 minutes away to come in and do these kinds of jobs. And I don't know if I don't think it's completely unique to the Bay Area, but it's probably extra amplified here. But I just feel like somewhere in our system politically and as communities, like we're not even built to be able to support each other, like kind of from a like offering the jobs and spreading the resources and being able to support. I mean, if I wanted to go out and even like volunteer and tutor kids who were disadvantaged, I'd have to travel a really long way to do that. So it's a little bit disjointed, but that's just what was coming to mind based on our discussion.
No, it's a good point. And again, I mean, some of this comes up a little bit later, but the fact that yes, there are plenty of people who are working some of those jobs and more than one of them, and yet there are still jobs that need to be filled. The fact that the wages are low and maybe have been kept low, you know, is something that is a huge issue here. And then when we talk about there are all these jobs, well, Shamna, you're putting out that they are often in places that are like the most expensive places to live. You know, so I mean, do these jobs is there Are there jobs everywhere in America? I don't, not necessarily. But they are in the places where the economy might be booming, and when the economy is booming, the cost of living becomes greater. And if there aren't wage adjustments, you're kind of you're in a difficult situation. Stacy, I'm going to have you unmute ask you to unmute.
Hi, yeah, I think that's an excellent point about not being able to live certain places. And that isn't true. I am in the Midwest, and that really isn't true where I live. But two things. One is we had gambling casinos come in many years ago, and they organized busing. And so they went and picked up their employees. I don't know if that's still happening, but I thought that was very ingenious about helping their people get to work. And then another point is I am empathetic, but I am not a bleeding heart, as they say. And I do live in an area where there are a lot of help wanted signs. And there was a person, you know, playing music for money. And I just asked him, I was really being curious as to why he didn't just go and apply for a job. And he said he was an immigrant, and that it took so many months to get the green card or whatever it is that they need to be employed. And so again, our country is falling down in fixing these things. If you are going to approve someone who is an immigrant, then let them work ASAP. How else can they take care of themselves?
It's a good point, Stacy, in terms of some of the barriers that exist the unseen barriers that exist to people actually working. And you mentioned immigrant status. In another part of the book, we talk about the fact that we have such a huge incarceration rate in the United States. A lot of people behind bars. Well, when and if some of those people get out, it's not always easy for them to get a job with the record that they have. There are laws in certain states that might make it a little bit harder for somebody to say no. But it's another barrier that exists that we have to think about, and part of it is just because of the numbers of people who the numbers and the types of people who have been subject to our incarceration system. Some of that comes up later in the book. But Wes, I think I don't see any other hands. If there are any other points on this question, we might move on in the interest of time.
Yeah, and I really like Stacy, that intersectionality, of there are, and we talked housing, we talked jobs, and Stacy brought up immigration. There are so many reasons, and if I don't know, I'm so excited to continue in the book because I think that in order to truly tackle this, we have to be willing to not only tackle poverty, but that means tackling the immigration situation, tackling the access to healthcare, tackling making housing afford. It is so complex, but that's why we're all here, is because we care and we want to see movement. And so appreciate, there's a lot of good stuff in the chat. I was really busy reading what you all had to say. So let's move on to question 3. And sorry, I was Googling something because I saw a comment in the chat that made me think of why housing's so expensive, particularly in a Black neighborhood in Omaha. And it's because out-of-state companies come in and try to buy all the homes and jack up the prices, either to own or rent. So, all right, number 3. What does Desmond mean by, quote, open, it's loading, so unwitting enemies of the poor? In what ways are those of us who are privileged unwitting enemies of the poor? So again, what does Desmond mean by, quote, unwitting enemies of the poor, end quote? In what ways are those of us who are privileged unwitting enemies of the poor? I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and I'll also put this question in the chat and look forward to hear your responses. Go ahead, Annette.
Something that I've thought about a lot over the years is the fact that we like cheap stuff. And for us to buy cheap stuff, we get it from people who get paid cheaply. Right? If you know, if I look at a pair of pants and when it's made in a certain country, it's going to be $30, but if it's made in Vietnam or in China, it's going to be $10, and I'm going to pay the $10. I want cheap stuff. And you unwittingly then are supporting poor wages.
Great connection. That is why we suggest buying, if you purchase the book, purchase from a local bookstore versus that other company out there. Thank you, Annette. Peg, good to see you. Heads up, Peg is also a member of our book club team, but has commitments on Monday evenings. So good to see you, and we'll get your mic turned on.
Thanks, Wes. I just wanted to add that, you know, in so many ways of our daily life, are we unwitting enemies of the poor? Even just kind of that question, or when Matthew raises that point in his book, I mean, it automatically lends itself to a class distinction. I don't know if people are willing to pay more for groceries so that the cashiers can have a higher wage. I don't know if people are willing to pay more to have their car fixed so the mechanic can have a higher wage, or maybe the mechanic has a higher wage than any of us would have. But we become kind of silent, we become taciturn to what goes on. And we think, well, you know, those people, whoever those people are, they live in that area of town, and keep them there. And don't have me pay more taxes because I believe it's not really going to help somebody. And you know, if the poor really didn't want to be poor, they would just go out and get a job. That's not my opinion at all, but it's just the mindset of very many people. And we've become kind of complacent to poor among us, and so we become unwitting enemies of the poor by just living our day-to-day lives, without taking active steps to really end the SES disparities that exist. And that's just financially. I mean, educationally, there's disparities. Housing, there's disparities. You know, all over. There's a starker and starker line between those who have and those who do not have. So thank you, Wes.
Appreciate it. There's some good things in the chat as well. Go ahead, Carol.
Yes, it's because we aren't putting ourselves in the position of understanding when people struggle who don't have the privileges that we have. It's part of being in the majority and being privileged. And we just don't get out of our comfort zones and reach out and change the laws and do the other things that need to be done to make sure that money that's allocated goes to where it goes to the people and not to frivolous activities like he mentioned in the book. And I think that's just when we can't, there's a them and us, that's our problem.
Thank you, Carol. Go ahead, Tracy.
Excuse me, I wasn't really going to speak tonight, but I'm the one that put the undervalued worker thing in the chat before, and that's one of the reasons I sometimes have to consider shopping at cheaper places. For example, groceries. The Stop and Shop chain located where we are is a Union store. I would prefer to shop there all the time, but of course the price is a little higher over there. Sometimes I have to go to Market Basket, which is not a Union store. They hire a lot of immigrants, which is fine but the prices are lower. And sometimes I have to go there. I'd rather support the Union store, but it's not an option for me. I edit a newspaper. You'd think that would be a high-paying profession. I have a master's degree. I make $35,000 a year. I've never made more than that. So sometimes you just have to take what you make and decide where you're going to put your money. And sometimes you can back up your ideals with it, and sometimes you can't.
Yes, and please know when we frame this question, this was truly focused on, those who are privileged and how they are unwitting in any of the poor. So please don't take any of these suggestions by anyone personal, unless you are a privileged person, because this is really what actions can those who are privileged, what can they take? So thank you, Tracy, for sharing as well. Tracy, are you trying to speak? Give me a thumbs up. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
I wasn't taking umbrage at anyone's point, it's assuming that they were considered, excuse me, overprivileged. I just had to point out that sometimes the poor end up working against themselves because it's just something they have to consider. It's not always the privileged that are doing this, making themselves their own worst enemy. Sometimes it's the poor themselves because they have no other choice.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Go ahead, Kate.
You know what? I guess I'm really lucky because while I'm certainly not a 1%er by any means, I think I am one of these people who's privileged. And in my social circles, in my neighborhood, when people might ask about certain things that I choose not to do, for instance, I won't shop at Walmart for these very reasons, right? I also always vote for lower income housing in my area, even though I know it will bring down my property value some, right? People make fun of me and they say, really, like these little things you do are not going to change all the problems in the world. And, I say to them, I'm no fool. I know that's true, but this is what I can do. And I always think of that thing that people talk about. How do you eat an elephant? Well, you eat him one bite at a time. And I'm surely not going to change the entire criminal justice system and the way that we undermine, especially African Americans in the country by trying to continue allowing racism and slavery just under different names. And if you think that that's not what's going on in the prisons, then we're all kidding ourselves, right? But I think that all of us have to commit to doing small things, no matter how difficult it is. And maybe you have to pay more for something that you don't want to pay more for. And maybe that's easy for me to say. I can't remember who it was who was talking about, they have their master's degree and they have to get by on $35,000 a year. I mean, really, that's a very difficult thing, I'm sure, to do. And I've been in a different position in my life where I have had to scrape by. I was a single mother with children and it was hard, so I know how difficult and tiring that can be. But I think that we just have to do what we can a small piece at a time. That's all.
Thank you, Kate. And Stacy put in a great quote to complement what you said. The journey of 1,000 miles starts with a step. So appreciate it. Go ahead, Tracy.
I just didn't want to leave anyone with the impression that I was regretting my life choice. I would never trade being a local newspaper editor for anything, especially with the way it's the only way people are going to get the truth about what's going on in the town. I just wish it was valued more by the people that subscribe to the paper or advertisers that would ordinarily pay my paycheck. I'm a one-person staff. My boss runs the paper all by herself. We have no vacation time. We have no sick time. I'm at home sick this week. I'm working from home. So it's just, we do what we have to do to inform people. I find that very rewarding. I just wish there was a way to make more money out of it. That's all.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Kamna.
Yeah, this conversation makes me think a lot about like conversations that I've had or thoughts that I've had about the climate, right? That there's individual actions that we can all take, but I think we also have to like walk and chew gum at the same time, or be able to operate be able to pull multiple levers at the same time. So there are the individual actions and the choices and just having more mindfulness around that. But also, I think, going down to who are we electing? What are we asking people to do? And how are we holding corporations accountable? I'm not sure that Amazon shutting down overnight would help the poverty problem immediately in this country. Like, I think there's a lot of, people that some of these ginormous, slightly evil or fully evil corporations employ as well. But it's like, how do we get them to take better care of their employees and their people and give them, good wages and all of that. So yeah, it's just someone used the how do you eat an elephant? I mean, it's that kind of thing. It's just, it's so huge, but I think it's going to take both, like individual choices plus looking at it, not assuming that the academics or the politicians will take care of everything at that higher systemic level. Like, we probably have a role in there too, which I'm looking forward to learning what to do through the book.
Me as well. And I loved how, I think it was in the prologue, we need to become poverty abolitionist. And so I'm hoping that was a little teaser of, don't tell me to be something if you don't give me some tips on how I can. But also, you all are inspiring and putting great things in the chat that are inspiring action, and for those who have already taken action. So that's great. I think we should move on to chapter 4. And so appreciate or chapter 4, question 4. So I will get that up on the screen here.
Okay, everyone. This is a question about the unhoused and maybe looking at it locally. The question is, does your local government criminalize the unhoused? If so, how and what action can you commit to taking to counter this? Are you seeing in your area ways in which your government essentially makes it illegal to be unhoused and rounds people up? And if so, what action can you take and what can you commit to take to counter this? And Wes, I'm not sure, just in terms of Wes and Robin, are there, some of the places where we know that this is occurring could be, maybe people could provide some examples too. So Robin, I'll ask you to unmute, or
Yeah.
you're unmuted.
One of the things that I've seen in some municipalities around where I live, they've changed the style of benches to put separators to kind of create individual seats on what was before like a 3-person bench. So like homeless people would sleep on those benches, and now they really can't because of these separators to create individual seats. And it's a way to, even though it's not incarcerating homeless people, it's just another one of those ways that they quote unquote discourage people from being in certain places and around certain people. Now, countering that, I have seen in some other places where I live, not everywhere, where and this is actually more on organizations where they provide people who are panhandling with vests so that they are easier to see by cars to keep them safe while they're on the streets panhandling. So it's almost kind of like the opposite of that. But yeah, the bench thing is a big thing that I've seen in my city, well, adjacent cities and in other places.
Thank you, Robin. That's a good point. And I'll just tell you a personal story. My daughter, who just finished architecture school, we were walking in DC, and or it might have been some city, and she basically pointed out, she said, that's an example of hostile architecture and hostile planning. And she pointed out the ways in which, just as you're saying, barriers were put up so that people could not lie down, places where you couldn't really sit, done intentionally. And I was glad that she was aware of it. I was also glad that in her program, they were recognizing those things and recognizing the decisions that planners are actually making when they do that. Carol, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
There's a law against being out on the sidewalk and camping out, and I'm actually involved in a organization in our community called Lafayette Transitional Housing Services, and we work with people who are homeless. We have a room for them to gather during the day, help them work with a caseworker and get benefits that they are entitled to, get them housed, provide everything that you need in an apartment, or at least the essentials, and get people going into housing. It's a constant struggle because I live in a town, sister towns, and a university. So we've got high rents because of all of the students and their parents who are willing to pay the high rents. So that's my way of contributing to helping people out. I volunteered there for more than 20 years.
Thanks very much, Carol. I'm seeing lots of interesting things in the chat. People talking about, Debbie says in one where she is, they don't criminalize it, they just try to hide it. But they try to hide them, the homeless, especially with the NFL draft coming to Detroit, and others jumping in and saying, yes, the idea is people don't want to see it, or it's not, people have talked about not in my backyard, with respect to other things. People aren't willing to look at it and try to solve it. They just want it to go away. Ramiz, and then we'll get to Nelson. Ramiz, I'm going to ask you to unmute. Oh wait,
Hi, sir. Hi.
Ramiz and then Stacy. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Hi to everyone. Sir, my question is like, of course, our great government is doing many great things for the American citizens, but still lots of American citizens, as I saw in this chat, and even I came to know that some American citizens are homeless from many years, right? So I don't understand what are the root causes for that. Like the people who are the citizens of our country, okay, but still have that homelessness problem with them. Okay. So is it because they're unemployed, or is it because they earn money and they have just spent out the money everywhere? And what can we do as an active citizens of the country? What can we do for building our great nation more greater? And because the government is already working nicely, okay, but as we are active citizens, as we are the great party members as well, so at an individual level, what can we do?
Good questions, and what can we do? Some of it is recognizing that we do have the problems, Ramiz, and I think we get into that in some more of the book a little bit later on. Nelson, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Nelson Tam calling in from Oakland, California. One thing that I actually foresee as a solution coming up for the next 3 years is that a lot of the excesses of the last decade in housing development, especially for the luxury sector, is starting to head deeply underwater, right? Like here in San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, a lot of the high rises that have come up the last 9 years are way behind on their mortgages. Like one building in San Francisco called the NEMA, N-E-M-A, is $400 million underwater. And it's time that we remove all of those barriers and we revise the affordable housing model, right? Because in a lot of cities, it costs like $1 million to construct 1 2-bedroom, 800 square foot unit. It's time for state and local governments to consolidate their resources and buy these buildings to convert to low-income housing ahead of a private equity syndicate would, right? I mean, those are my thoughts of where, some solutions are, right? And that would be the first step. So thanks for letting me share.
Thanks, Nelson. Excellent points. It actually reminds me of something that came up in the Joseph Stiglitz books and in this book. To a certain extent, we provide subsidies to those big projects, and it's another way in which the more government money and spending goes to the unpoor than it goes to the poor. And we don't even recognize that. Stacy, I apologize for neglecting you earlier. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Yeah, no, you weren't neglecting me, and I have already spoken. So always put other people in front of me. I'm very chatty, but I was just going to say a shout out to my own city. I took they had a class outreach, community outreach, and the city council offers it a couple of times a year, and I went to it this last time and learned of something that Kansas City is doing, and that is they have hired I honestly don't remember what the department is called, but they are in charge of unhoused people. And one of the points that he raised that some of you might not have thought of or recognized is that there are 2 kinds of unhoused, and that is the systemic, those who maybe have mental health issues, drug issues, what have you. And then there are those who, as a lot of us have mentioned in the chat, just run into a problem, and then that just spirals you out of you get evicted and blah, blah, blah. And so what Kansas City is doing is trying to help at least those people that have that kind of an incident come up, to help them cover that incident. They are, as he said, they can problem solve and they can manage. It's just when that unexpected thing just throws their little budget out of control. And so if the city can help with that, it really prevents a lot of other problems. And you know, that person becoming unhoused costs the city much more, or that family really becoming unhoused costs the city much more than helping with an unexpected small crisis. So if you get the chance to talk to your council and they aren't understanding that or engaged in that, bring that up. I mean, it's an investment in saving tax dollars.
Thanks, Stacy. Where is that again? Oh, I'm going to ask you to unmute again.
Sorry.
Jamel, I believe Kansas City. Not sure if
Kansas
that's
City. Okay, great.
the river
Thank-
or the Kansas size, but
All right.
if y'all
Okay.
didn't know, there's 2 Kansas cities.
Yeah. Cynthia, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Thank you. I'm enjoying this. It's been many decades since I've really delved into this issue. But as a retiree now, I'm finding these challenges to be my own as well. I've got to say to your last comment about how we're really subsidizing the rich. I know that in a lot of private. So, all right, I mentioned in the chat that I've done a lot of environmental work, stopping big, huge luxury developments around the Bay Area and in the Tahoe area against people like Cargill, the Sleeping Giant, and the such. And so, so we put a lot of money, we raised a lot of money for those kinds of things. But here it was for the purpose of preserving the integrity of the San Francisco Bay. And we actually got huge money from our legislators to invest in protecting the marshlands around the bay, multi-millions. And now I'm also working on projects for Open Space Authority in the South Bay of the San Francisco Bay. And again, we've had measures passed by the public granting multi-millions of dollars to protect open space, which I'm really enjoying and I'm volunteering at. But yeah, I'm starting to feel like I'm putting my efforts in the wrong place, that, we need to do that same kind of marketing, have those same kind of people that are so good at this sort of thing, to put their efforts behind the economic issues.
Those are great points, Cynthia. And it's interesting how we often see some environmental issues and social and other social issues, and how they merge. And you're I'm glad you're part of the conversation, because I think that's something that we're going to probably be talking about a bit more in other parts of the book.
Great.
I don't see other hands up, and I know that we're running short of time, Wes. I got a note from Robin suggesting that we might just have you go to question 6. We'll skip question 5, or we'll get to that maybe some other week. But I'll let you take over with question 6.
Yes, we are going to jump to question 6 here. And so question 6 centers around that popular belief regarding income subsidies, is that it disincentivizes people to work. Do you agree with this sentiment? Have you heard of this sentiment before? And what are some other common ideas about behaviors and policies, and how those policies help or harm impoverished people? And I want to center that conversation around what are, I think we all have heard this. And so I want to center more of the conversation in these last 6 minutes on, what are ways to counter, or what is a better way to message in terms of income subsidies. So thoughts on that? Would love to hear what you all have to say. And I'll keep this on the screen for about 10, 20 more seconds. And so again, that belief that income subsidies disincentivizes people to work. And so how do you counter that popular belief? And I'm going to stop sharing so I can see. So Jamel, if I need to help me out, please.
Okay, I'll ask Ramiz to unmute.
Sir, what I believe is that if subsidies are given to some people who are really aware about their opportunities, so I don't think that it's gonna have a negative effect on them, okay? Because they are definitely going to work hard and hard, even if they are getting the subsidies and all that. And apart from that, it is a kind of a beneficial thing as well for an active citizen who is hardworking. Yeah, of course, this kind of thing can be a bit of having a negative impact on the people who really don't want to work. Otherwise, for the people who are hardworking and who really love to work, and if subsidies are given to them, it's something like an additional benefit for them. It's something like a motivational thing for them. What I believe, and these are my views exactly on this particular question. Some people who don't want to work, or they just think that, okay, if these subsidies are given completely, so it's not gonna, it's going to make our life more easier and in more comfort zone or something like that. What I believe.
Appreciate it. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Peg.
Thank you, Wes. I don't know if subsidized income disincentivizes people to work. I just think that it becomes extremely challenging, and these are our working poor. That the minute you get a job, the minute you make above, a extremely low amount of money, your bus pass is taken away, your health benefits are taken away, income subsidy is taken away, or you have to pay full rent in another place, you have to move out of subsidized housing, and you just don't have enough. So it's not that it disincentivizes, it's just that it makes a way out of poverty so convoluted, so difficult. You can't even get ahead. And if you have a job and you get sick or your children get sick, you have no paid sick time, you lose your job, and then where are you back to? You're back in that cycle all over again. And something fundamentally needs to be done. And I'm not sure if choosing different elected officials is the answer, as much as the system itself needs to change, regardless of who is elected office. So thank you, Wes, for unmuting me.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you. Kamna.
Yeah, so two things on that. One is that I often think about what Andrew Yang used to say during his candidacy. I didn't necessarily agree with all his policies, but he talked about one of his arguments for the universal basic income was he used his wife as an example, right? Because he had he has a child with special needs, I believe on the autism spectrum, and so his wife would concentrate and focus her time on supporting their child, and therefore wasn't working. Now they're in a situation where, okay, it's okay for her not to work, but you have someone else who may not be in that situation, and what are they doing? You know, what can they do? They either neglect their child or they try to put food on the table. So I think that like income subsidies, we need to think about it as you know, like being there for life's shitty situations, for lack of a better way of putting it, and it can happen to any of us and all of us. But I also think this is a great question because it really goes back to the core of what we're talking about and what this book is about, is that I think that there's such a lack of understanding of what poverty really is and how many people, you know, what the working poor is and what they're actually making. $500, an extra $500 a month for me as someone who's privileged and has a job and has a home and all that might mean a really nice vacation at the end of the year, but $500 for someone who's in the working poor or under the poverty line can really make a difference in terms of being able to get medication or put food on the table. And I just think that the average person, the average privileged person, may not realize that. And so they automatically go to like, well, we don't need to give them extra work, you know, we don't need to give them extra money not for doing anything.